Welcome to a new week. This week we're talking about sleep, and I'm sure that you have had some introduction to at least parts of what we're going to talk about this week. But this is an important topic when we're looking at our lifelong health. So let's dive into some of these pieces. I think you know that sleep habits are really critical to the health and functionality of you as a person from day to day. We've all experienced, and then maybe it's easier to identify in other people than ourselves, but when people are low on sleep, it really influences their mood, and that can really influence your quality of life. So you probably have felt like you've known a roommate or a teammate or a family member or a friend that they didn't have adequate sleep and they were moody, they were irritable, they were short-tempered, and it's easy to see in other people. Well, that same thing is taking place in you, and that's sort of impacting your quality of life. If you really feel tired during the day, that's definitely going to impact how much you can get done during the day. So the more energized you are and the less tired you are, the more productive you're going to be. It's also important to get a good recognition that the highest amount of your restorative hormonal releases occurs actually during deep sleep, which means that's different from taking a nap. So if we're looking for both our brain and our body to heal best or to retain information best, if we're thinking about the mind, those are aspects that happen when we are in our deeper levels of sleep. So sleep's going to be really important. It will help to aid in the recovery from our physical body from workouts. It's also going to help in retaining information and continuing your learning instead of just being present to hear information. You'll be better and better at making connections, better and better at keeping that information available to you. Now, when we think about the importance of learning and as a college student, we often hear stress within the academic settings that studying is important. And that's absolutely true. But adequate rest can be just as important as adequate study. When we look at sleep needs for individuals that are the traditional college age, you're looking somewhere around that 8-hour time frame. So 8 to 10 hours per night is pretty crucial for the capacity for your brain to actually retain that information and to code that information in. It's actually a lot better to get more sleep than it is to stay up really, really late and study. You'll do way better approaching an exam if you wake up in a rested state with a clear state of mind than you would if you had stayed up until 3 a.m., highly caffeinated and cramming information. The distinctions between the two from a performance standpoint and just for a long-term remembering standpoint are pretty significant. If you get to a point where it's getting close to what should be your time to go to sleep so you can get that 8 hours of sleep, and you don't feel like you've fully met your studying expectations personally, it's probably better to go to sleep now, go to sleep at your bedtime, at your normal bedtime, and then get up just a little bit earlier in the morning or adjust what your morning routine is to sort of brush up on those last few pieces that you want to get content covered on. But if we're not getting enough sleep, there's definitely a lot of consequences that go into that. We can see in others if we can't see in ourselves, but when you're really sleep deprived, there's really poor decision making, and that poor decision making really influences our ability about whether we're going to be able to make better choices around our diet or around our activity level or around other indicators around our physical health. And it just really also has an impact on whether we're being kinder and nicer to the people around us. So as you look at some of the descriptions that are there on the slide, I think it's easy for us to point to those in other people, but it would be really helpful for you to recognize those are the same things that are happening to you when you are allowing yourself to not get adequate sleep. So what is it that's going to feed into our own sleep? what are some of the habits that either improve or detract from our quality of sleep? There's a lot of different outside factors that we can talk about. I'm going to hit on a couple within this lecture time. The first is our sleep hours. So we've said that it's important that you get somewhere around 8 hours of sleep a night. A really strong recommendation from those who study sleep and its impact on our health is that you go to bed and that you wake up consistently at the same time each day. So don't look at your Monday, Wednesday, Friday class schedule and your Tuesday, Thursday class schedule and start to make plans on like, well, I have it's a Monday night and I know my Tuesday classes, I don't have anything until my first class is at 1, so I can sleep way in. But on Mondays, I got to get up by 9 o'clock to make sure I get to my 10 o'clock class. That's not the most healthy way of approaching your own sleep habits. A much better way for you to reinforce the natural diurnal rhythm that your body has is to stick to a rhythm yourself or a habit yourself of going to bed at the same time each night and trying to wake up around the same time each day. One way to implement that to really try to influence whether you're indeed getting that 8 hours of sleep a night or not is to try and go to bed before midnight. Now, I know that's really tough. That's not necessarily the culture of college age students, but this would be a really good practice for you to experiment with across the semester and see what its impact is. Getting that good night's sleep, getting a good restorative 8 hours of sleep is going to be good for both your mind and your body. So if you get to bed between 10 and 11 and then are sleeping until 7 or 9 in the morning, then you're meeting that recommendations, that at least that minimum recommendation of that 8 hours of sleep. So the next thing that we can talk about is controlling the noise, one of the pieces of your environment that has an influence on your sleep. You can't always control what's happening in the full external environment. So depending on where your dorm is and what others on other floors or what other people within your dorm are doing can influence that noise. You may have an apartment or a house that is near either high traffic or even potentially by train tracks or things like that. There's all kinds of external noises that we don't necessarily have full control over. But we can experiment with finding out whether white noise or brown noise is something that's really valuable to us. So you can use fans or other functions that can kind of create some white noise. There's all kinds of apps, both that you can utilize that can either provide that white noise or that brown noise across the entirety of the afternoon or while you're sleeping, or that you can set them so that they go for a certain amount of time until you anticipate being asleep. So maybe they're on for 2 hours and then they just turn themselves off. But these kinds of practices can be really helpful for sort of reducing some of that outside noise and trying to improve the quality of sleep that you're getting. There's other things in our environment that we can talk about too. So when we continue to think about where are we sleeping and what can we do to improve that quality of sleep, one of the things that is important for you to consider is just how dark is the room that you're in. So ideally, the room is going to be as dark as possible. That really helps to influence our own diurnal rhythms. God made you in a way that really responds to cycles of light and dark. But in the unnatural sort of environments we put ourselves in where we can constantly control how much light there is, and we always have lights on, and maybe we're even looking at screens, our bodies and brains can get thrown out of that natural rhythm and by the artificial light. So if we can create rooms that are as dark as possible, that's going to really help to reinforce that this is a time for sleep. Temperature is also another important contributor to that. So you hopefully are able to control the thermostat within the living space that you have. You may even have the possibility of having AC if it's one of the times of year where it's warmer. If not, and it's a warmer time of the year and we're trying to get down to a slightly cooler temperature, then a few other options to try and moderate or lower that temperature, presuming that there isn't AC available to you, would be to open the window and maybe even add a fan in. Ideally, we're just trying to get that sleep temperature or the room temperature down to somewhere a little below 70 degrees to improve just our quality of sleep. Things external to that environment, things that are more behavioral in nature that we have that really have an influence on our sleep, is going to include nutrition. So if we have a poor diet that has a lot of processed foods within it, a lot of extra sugars, a lot of extra salt, those are going to have an impact on the way that our body responds. It's going to have a way on the way our body is able to recover. It has an influence on our natural rhythms. Dehydration, likewise, is going to have an influence on the way that your body acts and reacts in situations. So both in looking at our diet, which you've been spending time on, and thinking about your hydration level and making sure that what you're hydrating with is appropriate fluids or good fluids for you, going to be really helpful. Stimulants is another of those things that can really reduce our quality of sleep. So watch that caffeine intake, especially after your lunchtime. Those caffeine can have a long-term impact, and we'll look at it a little bit more here in just a bit. Other things that are under your control that are really going to help to improve your sleep, both quality and quantity, is exercising regularly. Regularly exercising is definitely going to increase the amount and quality of your sleep. And physical and fitness really will help to improve that quality of sleep as well. Basically, you can think of it like as if you're exercising regularly, then your body's going to be craving sleep for recovery. And that's going to increase that sleep drive, that influence on whether you feel like you want to sleep or not. Another practice for you to look at is napping. And now, overall, if you're getting adequate amounts of sleep regularly, napping for 20, 30 minutes is not a bad practice. It's another piece. While it doesn't get you into deep sleep, it can help to have some restorative value on the mind. So it doesn't have the same value as getting that 8 hours of sleep will, but if you're already rested, a nap's not necessarily a bad strategy. Where it becomes a bad strategy is if you are napping well after 3 p.m., and especially if you're taking long naps. So if you're getting naps that are over that 30-minute mark, and you are taking those naps after 3 p.m., that's really going to influence whether you want to fall asleep when it comes 11 o'clock at night or whenever is going to be your regular sleep scheduled time frame. Another one that you've heard over and over again, but it's super important, so we want to repeat it over and over again, is trying to limit that late night technology. Now, this one is absolutely a challenge, I think, both from us as a culture and from you in the just stage of life that you're in. As a college-age student, so much of our education is centered around screens, our studying, our completing tasks, maybe completing projects or exams. Much of that is done through technology and through screens. So is much of our entertainment. So much of our social entertainment, maybe it's watching videos or movies. A lot of that stuff, we just end up in front of our phones or in front of another screen. But sleep researchers have identified and keep reinforcing for us that blue light that those screens are so prominent at emitting is one of the key triggers that when we think about how God designed your body, and we reference back to that, your body is made to follow these diurnal rhythms of there's stages when you're awake and alert, and that's in the daytime, and there's stages when you are sleeping, resting, and recovering, and that's in the dark. That this blue light is one of the main triggers that indicates to your mind that you should be awake. So it's really a difficult practice and a challenge for a lot of people to go from the wakefulness and intentionalness of being thoughtfully engaged, especially if it's with studying or working on projects, in conjunction with that blue light that's telling your body and mind that this is a time you should be highly alert, and then to just immediately turn that off and try to fall asleep. It's just not the way our bodies were designed. So that may be the biggest practice for you to experiment and finding what's the best solution for you. But really try to find ways where you can be away from your computer, or be away from your phone, be away from screens for at least 30 minutes before you're trying to actually fall asleep. Last, like we mentioned before, stimulants are things that are intended to keep you awake and intended to keep you alert. So we want to be avoiding those kinds of things as we get close to when we're trying to fall asleep. So avoid caffeinated beverages, avoid chocolate, avoid tobacco. As it gets to those afternoon hours, all of those things are going to influence whether your mind is ready to fall asleep or whether it is still activated and wants to be attentive and alert and awake. Avoiding large meals before bedtime is also a helpful practice. What's going on within your own digestive system sends information back to your brain and then back to your mind, and that has an influence. So it may not be appropriate to say never eat after 9 p.m., but it's certainly better to not eat after 9 p.m. I know that with game schedules, with travel schedules, with those kinds of pieces, that you may get done with an away game and it's, you're not even getting to the restaurant till 8:30 or 9 p.m. So I don't think it's necessarily appropriate to say never eat after 9 p.m. But as you're thinking about your general habits and your general routines, as much as possible, try to avoid eating late night meals. That is another thing that will help to improve your quality and your quantity of sleep. And all of those things are going to help improve both your body and your mind, move you towards the things that you're really trying to accomplish. Thanks for being here this week. If you run into any questions, if there's anything I can be helping you with, let me know, and I look forward to hearing from you. Have a good week.